The air was thick with tension. The earth trembled beneath the weight of the Vecrian war machines, their massive shadows creeping across the ruined cities. The sky, once a bright blue, was now a dull, oppressive gray as the alien invaders spread across the globe like a plague. Their technology was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Laser cannons that could melt steel, drones that could fly at supersonic speeds, and shields that made their ships nearly invincible. Earth's military, armed with old-fashioned guns and planes, had been wiped out within hours. Every country had fallen one by one. And yet, in the midst of all this destruction, there was one voice that refused to be silenced. Her name was Lieutenant Emma Stone. Emma was no hero in the eyes of the Vecrians. She wasn't a general or a military strategist. She didn't have advanced weaponry or superhuman abilities. She was just a regular human soldier, one of the many who had fought and lost when the world crumbled. But that didn't stop her from fighting. The Vecrians had invaded Earth, and they had mocked the humans for their so-called primitive tactics. They saw the humans as weak, small, fragile creatures who had no chance of standing against them. To the Vecrians, humanity was a blip in the grand scheme of the universe. But Emma had never believed that. She knew humanity was capable of something greater. She wasn't some trained soldier with fancy gadgets. She was a survivor, and she was going to make them regret underestimating her. Emma sat in the darkened corner of the makeshift command center, staring at a map of the Vecrian stronghold that lay in the mountains. The walls around her were cracked, the flickering lights above her casting eerie shadows across the room. The other soldiers around her were either sleeping or deep in thought, too tired to speak, too broken to care. They had lost so much. Cities had burned, families had been torn apart, the world had been plunged into darkness. But Emma wasn't like them. She had no intention of giving up. Her fingers traced the map as she whispered to herself, "There's still hope." The stronghold was heavily guarded, surrounded by walls made of an alien metal that seemed impervious to anything humanity had. It was the Vecrians' base of operations, the nerve center of their invasion. But Emma knew something the Vecrians didn't. Their technology, their arrogance, would be their downfall. She wasn't going to fight them head-on. That would be suicide. Instead, she had something far more dangerous, her mind. While the Vecrians relied on their weapons and brute force, Emma would rely on tactics, on using the land, the environment, and the element of surprise. Her greatest weapon wasn't her rifle, it was her ability to outthink her enemies. The sound of footsteps broke Emma from her thoughts. She looked up to see Commander Larkin, a tall man with a tired face, approaching her. He was one of the few who still believed in the fight. "Emma," Larkin said quietly, sitting beside her. "We've heard the reports. The Vecrians have almost completely wiped us out. The resistance is scattered and we're running out of time." "I know," Emma replied, her voice steady, "but we still have one thing they don't have." "What's that?" Larkin asked, his eyes narrowing. "Us, humans. We may not have their technology, but we have something far stronger, determination." Larkin stared at her for a long moment before sighing. "You really believe we can win this?" "I do," Emma said, her voice unwavering, "and I'm going to prove it." The following morning, Emma packed her gear, preparing for what she knew would be a dangerous mission. Alone, with no backup, she would infiltrate the Vecrian stronghold and destroy it from within. The others had tried to convince her to wait for reinforcements, but Emma knew that the longer they waited, the stronger the Vecrians would become. If she didn't act now, Earth would be lost forever. She could feel the weight of the mission on her shoulders as she made her way to the mountain pass. The terrain was treacherous, and the Vecrians had set up patrols all over the place. Every step was a risk, but Emma was used to risks. She had been in dangerous situations before, and each time she had managed to survive. This time would be no different. The mountain was cold and unforgiving. Snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, obscuring her vision, but Emma pushed on, her breath coming in steady puffs as she made her way toward the stronghold. She had no illusions about the challenge ahead. The Vecrians were ruthless, and they had no mercy. But Emma had something they didn't, a deep love for her people and an unshakable belief that they could fight back. As she climbed higher, she began to think about the people she had lost, her family, her friends. They were all gone now, victims of the Vecrian invasion. The memories of their faces, their laughter haunted her, urging her forward. She couldn't let their deaths be in vain. She couldn't let the Vecrians win. Hours passed, and the wind began to howl around her, cutting through her jacket like a knife. But Emma kept going. The higher she climbed, the closer she was to the stronghold. She could feel the weight of the battle ahead, the final confrontation that would determine the fate of Earth. And then, just as she was beginning to wonder if she could make it, the Stronghold came into view. The massive fortress loomed ahead, a symbol of the Vecrians' power. The walls, covered in strange, alien symbols, stretched high into the sky, almost touching the clouds. But there was a crack in their armor, a vulnerability Emma knew she could exploit. She dropped to the ground, crawling through the snow to a hidden crevice she had spotted earlier. Her heart raced as she crept forward, her mind focused on one goal: take down the Vecrians. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every human who had lost everything. For every person the Vecrians had killed, she would make them pay. And it would be with nothing but her wit, her cunning, and her sheer willpower. Emma's journey had just begun, but she was ready for whatever came next. The Vecrians had mocked her primitive tactics, but they would learn, just as every other enemy had, that humanity was anything but primitive. We were survivors, and nothing, no matter how advanced, could break that. The Stronghold loomed ahead, its towering walls coated in the alien materials that seemed impervious to anything humanity could throw at it. But Emma wasn't afraid. She wasn't even nervous. Her heart beat steadily in her chest as she surveyed the massive fortress, its cold, steel exterior standing like a monument to the Vecrians' arrogance. She had made it this far. The hardest part was behind her. Emma knew the Vecrians wouldn't expect a small, lone human soldier to dare infiltrate their most heavily guarded stronghold. To them, she was a joke, a mere nuisance, but they were wrong, dead wrong. In her hands, Emma held nothing but a few homemade explosives, a basic rifle, and the sharpest weapon in her arsenal: her mind. She had been trained in guerrilla warfare, in the art of stealth, and in surviving against impossible odds. But it was her creativity, her ability to outthink her enemies, that would carry her through. She knew she had to move fast. The Vecrians' advanced scanners would pick up on her presence soon enough, and she couldn't afford to be caught. But she also knew that in their arrogance, the aliens had overlooked one crucial thing: they had no idea how humans fought. Emma crawled through the snow and rubble, keeping to the shadows. The fortress was surrounded by large watchtowers, their tall, dark figures scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. She couldn't afford to be seen. One wrong move and everything would fall apart. As she moved closer to the stronghold's outer walls, Emma carefully examined the terrain. She studied the map before setting off, memorizing every detail. There was a narrow gap between the eastern wall and a ridge of jagged rocks. It was tight, but it was her only way in. Taking a deep breath, Emma made her move, moving quickly and quietly. The cold wind bit at her skin, but she ignored it. She focused on the task at hand. The gap between the wall and the rocks was narrow, too narrow for a Vecrian soldier to slip through. It was perfect. As she squeezed through, the sound of her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She was inside. The stronghold's interior was even more imposing than the exterior. The halls were lined with glowing alien technology, each piece more complex than anything human engineers could ever dream up. The walls hummed with energy, and the air was thick with the scent of metal and ozone. Emma slipped through the hallways, moving like a shadow. Every step was calculated. She knew she couldn't afford to make a sound. She avoided the patrols, sticking to the dark corners of the building. Her hands trembled slightly, but she pushed the fear down. She was a soldier. She had trained for this. She paused outside a heavy door that led to a control room. Two Vecrian guards stood outside, chatting in their strange language, their voices deep and guttural. They didn't see her. They never even noticed her presence. Emma's mind worked quickly. The Vecrians were overconfident. They thought their security was unbreachable, but Emma knew better. She had been trained to think like an enemy. She had studied their movements, their routines. She knew how to exploit their weaknesses. Taking a deep breath, Emma reached into her pack and pulled out one of her homemade explosives, a small device, simple but effective. She set it near the door and set the timer. Then, without a second thought, she ran. The explosion was small, but enough to knock out the guards and send the door crashing open. Emma slipped inside the control room just as the Vecrians scrambled to recover from the blast. Her eyes darted across the room, landing on the central console. It was now or never. With quick, precise movements, Emma set to work. She had no idea how the Vecrians' systems worked, but she didn't need to know. She just needed to disrupt them. She hacked into their computer system, using her rifle as a makeshift tool to pry open the control panel. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. As she worked, she couldn't help but think of the millions of lives that depended on this moment. The cities that had burned, the families torn apart. Her heart ached with every memory, but she couldn't let that stop her. She had to finish this. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a set of controls that would override the fortress's energy shields. One push of a button and the Stronghold would be vulnerable. The Vecrians would be exposed. Emma's finger hovered over the button, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. But just as she was about to push it, the door to the control room crashed open. 3 Vecrian soldiers barged in, their weapons raised. Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Get down," one of the Vecrians shouted. They had seen her. There was no way out now. But Emma didn't panic. She didn't freeze. Instead, she dove to the ground, rolling behind a set of massive power generators. The Vecrians followed her, their boots pounding against the floor. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight them all head-on, she had to think. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could give her an advantage. That's when she saw it, an exposed electrical panel just above the power generators. In a flash of inspiration, Emma grabbed a piece of metal and jammed it into the wires. Sparks flew as the electrical system short-circuited, sending a surge of power through the room. The Vecrians screamed in shock as the lights flickered, their weapons misfiring. Emma didn't waste a second. She fired her rifle, hitting one of the Vecrians in the chest. The alien fell and the others turned to face her, their eyes burning with fury. But Emma was already on the move. She ducked behind a stack of crates and threw one of her remaining explosives. It landed at their feet, and with a deafening explosion, the Vecrians were knocked off their feet. Emma rushed to the console, her hands trembling as she punched in the final command. The Stronghold's energy shields flickered, then dropped. The Vecrians were exposed. She had done it. But just as Emma started to breathe a sigh of relief, a voice echoed through the control room. "Well done, human, but it's too late." Emma turned, her heart racing. Standing in the doorway was Zarnak, the Vecrian commander. His alien form was massive, towering over her. He had been watching her the entire time. "You're clever," Zarnak sneered, "but you're still just a human." Emma didn't flinch. She stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We may be primitive to you, but you've underestimated us." With that, the final battle was about to begin. The moment Emma locked eyes with Zarnak, she knew the true battle was only beginning. His massive form towered over her, a terrifying presence. His skin shimmered with a metallic sheen and his eyes glowed with an unholy light. He was everything the Vecrian stood for: power, arrogance, and technology. But Emma didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hands steady on her rifle, her mind sharp. "You're clever," Zarnak said, his voice deep and resonant. "But you're still just a human. Do you really think you can defeat me?" Emma didn't answer right away. She couldn't afford to waste time with words. Her every muscle was tense, ready to spring into action. She had already outsmarted countless Vecrians, and she would do it again. "You've made a mistake, Zarnak," Emma finally said, her voice unwavering. "You underestimate us." Zarnak laughed, a deep, guttural sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "What could a single human possibly do against me? I have the strength of 1,000 warriors." "But you don't have what we have," Emma replied. "You don't have the human will to fight, the heart to survive. You'll never understand that." With a swift motion, she dropped to the ground, rolling to the side to take cover behind the console. The Vecrians' technology might be advanced, but Emma knew that in battle, speed, cunning, and sheer willpower were just as powerful. The Vecrian commander didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at her, his alien hand steady. But Emma was faster. In a split second, she fired her rifle, the bullet striking the console and sending sparks flying. The impact forced Zarnak to stumble back, momentarily blinded by the explosion. She couldn't waste this chance. Emma scrambled to her feet, darting toward a pile of heavy equipment near the wall. Her mind raced as she searched for her next move. Zarnak was powerful, but Emma wasn't going to fight him head-on. That would be suicide. She had to outthink him, just like she had outthought all the others before him. She glanced at the room. The Vecrians had built this fortress with pride, sleek walls of alien metal, high-tech weaponry, and automated defenses. But for all their advancements, the room was still full of weaknesses. Emma spotted a small air vent near the ceiling, just above Zarnak's head. If she could reach it, she could escape through the ducts and strike from above. With the Vecrian commander distracted, Emma sprinted toward the far side of the room. She moved silently, her breath steady, keeping her movements quick and precise. Zarnak, still disoriented, was slowly recovering. His footsteps thundered as he moved toward her, but Emma was already behind cover, the air vent just within reach. She climbed quickly, her hands shaking but determined. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pulled herself into the narrow vent, her rifle clutched tightly in her hands. She had done this 1,000 times in training, but this was real. This was life or death. As she crawled through the narrow ducts, Emma's mind didn't focus on the danger. It didn't focus on the enemy. It focused on the mission. Her thoughts turned to the people she had lost, her family, her friends, the cities that had been reduced to ashes. She thought of all the innocent lives still out there, counting on her to finish what had been started. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for everything she loved, for everything humanity had ever stood for. And she would win. The vent system was long and winding, but Emma had memorized the layout. She knew where the critical parts of the Stronghold were, where the power cores were located, where the command center was, and most importantly, where the energy shields were controlled. She was close now. She just had to make it to the central junction. Suddenly, she heard Zarnak's voice echoing through the ducts, his words distorted but still clear. "You can run, human, but you can't hide. We always find our prey." His voice sent a chill down Emma's spine, but she refused to be intimidated. She wasn't running. She was surviving, and soon she would make her move. As she reached the central hub, Emma could hear the hum of the Vecrians' power systems. The energy shields would be vulnerable now. If she could overload their power core, she could shut down the entire fortress. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. She moved silently to the control panel, opening it with swift precision. The system was intricate, full of alien designs and unfamiliar technology. But Emma wasn't afraid. She had studied enough to understand the basics. She hacked into the console, overriding the security measures with a series of commands. Her fingers flew across the keys, every motion calculated, every action intentional. She could hear Zarnak's footsteps approaching again, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to, she was so close. The energy shield was powering down. The fortress would soon be exposed. "Almost there," she muttered to herself, her breath steady despite the tension that gripped her chest. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind her. Zarnak had reached the central hub. He was closing in fast. Emma didn't have much time. In a final, desperate move, she slammed her fist down on the activation button. Sparks flew, and the room lit up as the system overloaded. A massive explosion rippled through the fortress, shaking the ground beneath Emma's feet. The lights flickered, and the hum of the energy shield ceased. She had done it. For a brief moment, Emma stood in stunned silence. The fortress was vulnerable. The Vecrians were exposed. But before she could react, Zarnak's voice boomed through the room. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." The sound of his voice snapped her back to reality. The Vecrians were still a threat, but now they were nothing more than a beast with its defenses torn away. Emma had broken through their strongest line of defense. And she wasn't stopping now. The entire stronghold shook, and Emma's heart pounded in her chest. The blast had done its job, shutting down the Vecrians' energy shields, but she could feel the tension in the air. She wasn't safe yet. Zarnak's voice still echoed in the corridors, his words full of fury. "You think you've won, human?" Zarnak's booming voice vibrated the walls. "You have only triggered your own doom." Emma knew he was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The Vecrian commander was relentless, and now that the shields were down, he would stop at nothing to crush her. But Emma wasn't going to back down. She had come too far to lose now. Her mind raced as she moved swiftly through the hallways of the stronghold. Every step echoed in the silence, a constant reminder that time was running out. Zarnak would be on her soon, and she had to act fast. She had crippled their defenses, but the final blow was still within her reach. She paused in front of a heavy, metallic door. This was it. Behind it lay the central command room, where the Vecrians controlled their entire operation. If she could reach the core system, she could end this war. The thought of finally defeating the aliens, of finally avenging all those who had suffered, pushed her forward. But she wasn't just fighting for revenge. She was fighting for the future, for her people. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the door. Her hand trembled slightly, but she didn't hesitate. She pressed the button to open it, and the doors slid apart with a hiss. Inside, the control room was bathed in a dim, eerie glow from alien monitors and consoles. In the center of the room stood Zarnak, towering over a series of glowing screens. His eyes locked onto hers, filled with rage. "You cannot win, human. You're nothing but a tiny insect," he sneered, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. Emma stood her ground. "You're wrong. You may have power, you may have weapons, but you don't have what we have. You don't have heart." Zarnak laughed, the sound chilling. "Heart, that's your weapon. It won't save you now." Before Emma could react, Zarnak lunged, his massive body charging at her with terrifying speed. Emma dove to the side, rolling across the floor just as his hand swiped through the air where she had been standing. The force of his blow shattered the console behind her, sparks flying in all directions. She was on her feet in an instant, her rifle raised and ready. But she knew she couldn't win this with sheer firepower alone. Zarnak was too strong. His speed and size made him an almost unbeatable force in a direct fight. She had to be smarter than that. With quick thinking, Emma sprinted toward a nearby pillar, using it for cover. Zarnak followed, his steps heavy and thunderous as he closed the distance between them. She could feel the ground trembling beneath his weight. She needed to buy more time. Emma glanced around, looking for anything that could give her an edge. Her eyes locked on a nearby control panel, an emergency override switch that could trigger a massive power surge in the Stronghold. She didn't know exactly what it would do, but it was her best chance. Zarnak was almost on top of her now, his form casting a dark shadow over the room. She could see the rage in his eyes, the arrogance that had brought the Vecrians to Earth in the first place. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps, her muscles aching from the effort of staying ahead of him. But she didn't let the exhaustion stop her. She wasn't done yet. With a burst of energy, she pushed herself off the pillar and ran toward the control panel. Zarnak roared, charging after her with an inhuman speed. She reached the panel just as he was about to strike. Without thinking, she slammed her fist onto the override switch. The room exploded with light as the power surged through the Stronghold. Sparks flew, and the walls rattled with the force of the energy coursing through the building. Zarnak staggered back, disoriented by the sudden overload. Emma didn't wait. She knew this was her chance. She dashed toward the central console where the core system was located. Her fingers flew across the keys, entering a sequence of commands she had memorized. The plan she had set into motion was about to reach its final stage. But Zarnak was recovering quickly. He roared in fury and charged at her once more. This time, Emma didn't have time to reach the console. Instead, she grabbed a nearby piece of alien equipment and hurled it at him. The object collided with Zarnak's shoulder, throwing him off balance. It was enough to slow him down, but not enough to stop him. Zarnak reached out with his massive hand, his fingers closing around Emma's arm in a vice-like grip. He lifted her off the ground, his eyes burning with hatred. "You should have stayed in the shadows, human," he spat. "Now you'll pay for your insolence." Emma gritted her teeth, her mind racing. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let everything she had fought for end like this. Her eyes flicked to the control panel just within reach. In a burst of strength, she twisted her body, using the momentum to break free from his grip. She fell to the floor, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no time to waste. Zarnak was coming for her again. With a final effort, Emma dove toward the console, slamming her fist into the emergency shutdown button. The Stronghold began to tremble again, this time more violently than before. Zarnak roared, his voice full of pure rage. But it was too late. The Stronghold systems were failing, the power grid crashing under the weight of the overload. The walls cracked, and the floor buckled as the entire building started to collapse. Emma ran, not looking back. She could hear the Vecrian commander's angry shouts fatting behind her as she sprinted through the crumbling hallways. The walls shook with the force of the explosion that ripped through the heart of the Stronghold. Emma was almost there, just a few steps away from the exit. With one final burst of energy, she threw herself through the crumbling doorway, the blast from the explosion knocking her off her feet. But she didn't stop. She kept running, her heart racing as she made her way through the debris. As she emerged into the open air, the ruins of the Vecrian stronghold behind her, Emma stopped for a moment to catch her breath. The mission was over. The Vecrians had been defeated. The fight wasn't just for survival, it was for humanity. She had done it. The explosion was deafening. As Emma stumbled to her feet, The earth beneath her seemed to tremble with the force of the blast. Her ears rang from the sound, and smoke billowed from the collapsing walls of the stronghold. She could feel the heat of the flames licking at her skin as she ran, her heart racing in her chest. The mission was far from over. The Vecrians may have been defeated for now, but the destruction of their stronghold was only the beginning. She pushed herself harder, her body aching with every step. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she sprinted through the ruins of the alien fortress. She had to get to the extraction point. The Vecrians would be coming for her, and she couldn't afford to be caught. Her legs felt like lead, but Emma didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. The once imposing stronghold that had loomed above her like a dark shadow was now nothing more than a burning ruin. What had once been a fortress of invincibility was now a shattered heap of alien technology, its systems broken and its power grid in ruins. But the Vecrians were not defeated yet. Their arrogance was their greatest flaw, and they would come after her with everything they had. Emma knew that, but she also knew something else. They were not invincible, and she had just proved that. The landscape around her was a wasteland of destruction, but Emma didn't let it deter her. She had a purpose, a mission to complete. The humans who had fought and died, the cities that had been reduced to ashes, all of it had led to this moment. She had to finish it. The wind howled as she neared the edge of the ruined fortress. The final extraction point was just ahead, a small shuttle that would take her away from the destruction. She could already see it in the distance, a glimmer of hope in the desolate landscape. But as she neared the shuttle, the sound of a low growl stopped her in her tracks. Turning slowly, Emma's heart dropped when she saw them. A group of Vecrian soldiers, their bodies cloaked in the thick smoke of the crumbling stronghold, emerged from the shadows. They were no longer the calm, calculating force that had first invaded Earth. These soldiers were enraged, their eyes burning with hatred as they locked onto Emma. Zarnak had failed, but these soldiers would stop at nothing to finish what their commander had started. Emma's mind raced as she calculated her next move. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but she wasn't afraid. She had come this far. She had survived against the odds, and she wasn't about to let a group of Vecrians stop her now. The soldiers raised their weapons, their eyes cold with malice. Emma's fingers tightened around the rifle in her hands, but she knew she couldn't win this fight in a direct confrontation. She was alone, and they were too many. She needed a plan. The first Vecrian fired, his weapon sending a blast of energy in her direction. Emma dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the shot. The blast sent a cloud of dirt and debris into the air, blinding her for a moment. But she didn't panic. She had been trained for moments like this. Her mind worked quickly, finding the advantage in the chaos. The soldiers were too focused on her. They didn't see the weakness in their formation. Emma rolled to the side, moving with speed and precision. She fired her rifle at the nearest soldier, taking him down in a single shot. The others turned, momentarily thrown off by the sudden attack. But Emma didn't wait. She darted forward, using the rubble around her for cover. She ducked behind a large chunk of fallen concrete, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the soldiers shouting orders to each other, but she stayed low, waiting for the perfect moment. She knew they would come for her. She just had to make them think she was trapped. The seconds ticked by like hours as Emma crouched behind the concrete slab, her breath shallow. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, looking for any sign of movement. She could hear the soldiers getting closer. Their footsteps grew louder, their presence overwhelming. Then, with a burst of energy, Emma sprang from her hiding place, her rifle raised. She fired twice, taking down 2 more soldiers before they could react. The remaining soldiers hesitated, shocked by her sudden ferocity. But Emma was relentless. She moved swiftly, using the terrain to her advantage. She rolled behind another pillar of debris and continued her assault. The soldiers tried to regroup, but Emma's quick thinking and precision made them hesitate at every turn. With every soldier she took down, her confidence grew. She was winning this fight. She wasn't going to let them destroy what she had fought so hard for. The Vecrians were no longer the superior force. They were the ones on the defensive now. Finally, the last of the soldiers fell. Emma stood in the silence of the battlefield, her body trembling with exhaustion but her spirit unbroken. The shuttle was waiting, and she had done it. The Vecrians were finished. They had underestimated humanity, and now they had paid the price. As she made her way toward the shuttle, Emma took one last look at the destroyed stronghold. It had been a symbol of their power, a fortress that had once seemed impenetrable. But now it was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and she had brought it down. She climbed aboard the shuttle, the door closing behind her with a soft hiss. As the ship took off, rising from the shattered landscape, Emma looked out at the burning wreckage below. She had won. The Vecrians were gone. Earth was free. But as the shuttle soared into the sky, Emma knew the fight wasn't truly over. There would be more battles to come, more enemies to face. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of relief. She had fought for her people. She had fought for humanity, and she had won. The Vecrians had mocked her primitive tactics, but in the end, it was those tactics, her wit, her cunning, and her sheer will to survive, that had destroyed their stronghold and secured humanity's future. And as the shuttle continued its flight towards safety, Emma whispered to herself, "We are not done yet." Shuttle ascended into the clear sky, leaving behind the burning remains of the Vecrian stronghold. Emma stared out of the small porthole, her heart still racing from the battle. Her hands, though steady, ached with exhaustion. Her muscles were sore, every step she had taken during the mission now a reminder of how much she had given. But she didn't feel victorious, at least not yet. The fight had been brutal, but Emma knew that the war was far from over. The Vecrians may have lost their stronghold, but they weren't just going to give up. They were powerful, and the idea that they would let one human woman defeat them so easily was nothing but a fantasy. Her mind drifted back to the explosion that had ripped through the stronghold. The blast had felt like a victory, but it also marked the start of something much larger. The Vecrians would come for Earth again, but Emma had something they didn't. She had shown them that even the most advanced force in the galaxy could be brought to its knees by a single, determined human. The question now was, would the rest of humanity be ready? Emma shook her head, trying to focus on the present. There would be time to worry about the future later. For now, she just needed to breathe, to remember that she had done something that no one thought possible. She had destroyed the Vecrian stronghold, crippled their military, and given humanity a fighting chance. She had proven that they were not helpless, they were not weak. Her thoughts were interrupted as the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "We're approaching the drop zone. Hold on tight, Lieutenant Stone." Emma gripped the sides of her seat, preparing for the landing. The shuttle started to descend, cutting through the thick clouds that had gathered over the landing area. Below, she could see the silhouette of a base, the new human resistance headquarters, hidden deep in the mountains. As the shuttle touched down, Emma took a deep breath and stood up. The moment she stepped outside, she was greeted by the cold mountain air. The snow crunched beneath her boots, and for a moment the silence of the world around her felt oddly peaceful. It was a quiet she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. The war had consumed everything, but now, as she stood in the aftermath of her mission, she felt the weight of it all. A small group of soldiers stood waiting by the landing pad, their faces grim. They had been following her mission, tracking her progress. As Emma stepped off the shuttle, they saluted her, their respect clear in their eyes. Emma returned the gesture, but there was no pride in her heart, only the deep knowledge that the battle was far from won. The commanding officer, Colonel Harris, approached her. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his face weathered with age and experience. His eyes softened when he saw Emma, but his voice was firm. "Lieutenant Stone, you did what many thought was impossible. You've struck a major blow against the Vecrians, but the war isn't over. We still have a long road ahead." Emma nodded. "I know, but this is a start. We've shown them that they can't just walk all over us, that we're not just some weak species they can crush in a matter of days." Harris's expression darkened. "It's true, but there's still a lot we don't know about the Vecrians. We've been fighting blindly for so long. You've given us a chance to regroup, to make a plan, but we need more intel. We need to know what's next." Emma's gaze shifted back to the base. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. "We'll take this fight to them piece by piece, and we won't stop until Earth is safe." Colonel Harris clapped a hand on her shoulder. "We've got a long way to go, Lieutenant, but we're not alone anymore. You've given us hope, and that's something we can build on." Over the next few days, Emma worked alongside the human resistance forces to rebuild. She shared her experience, telling them everything she had learned about the Vecrians, their technology, and their tactics. The base was buzzing with activity, soldiers, engineers, and scientists working together to form a strategy. They were learning to adapt, to fight smarter, not harder. But despite all the planning, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were still on the edge of a precipice. The Vecrians had lost one battle, but they were still out there, waiting, watching. Emma could feel their presence like a shadow looming over everything. One evening, as she sat alone in the mess hall, Emma stared at the empty plate in front of her. Her mind wandered back to the people she had lost, Her family, her friends, the countless lives taken by the Vecrians. Every face, every moment flashed in her memory, and the weight of it all pressed down on her chest. "Are you all right, Lieutenant?" Emma looked up to see Colonel Harris standing in the doorway. He had a knowing look in his eyes, as though he understood the burden she carried. He wasn't just her superior officer. He had become a kind of mentor to her over the past few days. He had been through countless battles, yet Emma saw in him a quiet kind of pain, the same pain she felt. "I'm fine," Emma said, offering him a weak smile. "Just thinking." Harris stepped inside and pulled up a chair. "Thinking about what?" "The future," Emma said, her voice quiet. "We've won this battle, but I can't help but wonder how much longer we can hold on. The Vecrians are powerful. What if they come back stronger?" "We'll be ready," Harris said confidently. "We've learned from you, Lieutenant. We've learned how to fight smarter, how to survive. We won't let them take Earth again." Emma nodded, but the doubts still lingered in the back of her mind. She had done everything she could to cripple the Vecrians, but she knew they wouldn't give up so easily. The fight was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, the resistance grew stronger. Emma found herself training new recruits, teaching them the same tactics she had used to defeat the Vecrians. The once distant thought of victory seemed closer, but the reality of the war still loomed large. The Vecrians were out there, and their vengeance would be swift. But Emma was no longer alone. She had given humanity a chance, and in return they had given her something invaluable, a reason to keep fighting. Humanity had shown its resilience, and now Emma knew it was time to take the fight to the Vecrians. They may have underestimated her, but they wouldn't underestimate humanity ever again. Weeks had passed since Emma's victory, but the weight of the battle still clung to her like a shadow. The base had become a hive of activity, buzzing with new recruits, engineers, and scientists working to turn the tide in humanity's favor. The world was starting to heal, but the scars of war ran deep. The Vecrians had underestimated humans once, and that had cost them their stronghold. But Emma knew that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Every morning she would rise before the sun, the memories of the fallen pushing her forward. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about honor, revenge, and ensuring that the sacrifices made were not in vain. Emma had fought for every inch of ground, and she wasn't going to stop until humanity was truly free. One evening, as she stood at the edge of the base, watching the sun set behind the mountains, she could hear the sounds of training in the distance. Soldiers ran drills. Engineers tinkered with new technology. There was a sense of hope in the air, a feeling Emma hadn't dared to believe in for a long time. But even hope could feel heavy when you were the one carrying it. She knew that they were still vulnerable, still unprepared for the Vecrians' inevitable return. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of footsteps. She turned to see Colonel Harris approaching, his face grim but determined. "You're out here again?" he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've told you before, rest is just as important as work." Emma gave him a half-smile. "Rest doesn't win wars." "No," Harris agreed, "but it makes us stronger for the battles ahead." Emma nodded but didn't respond. She wasn't tired, not in the way Harris meant, but her mind was tired. It had been working overtime, constantly planning, analyzing, and preparing for the next step. The war was far from over, and there was still so much to be done. "I'm worried," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we're not ready? What if the Vecrians come back stronger than before?" "They will," Harris said, his voice steady. "And when they do, we'll be ready. We've learned from them, and we've learned from you." Emma looked at him, her heart aching. "I've given everything I have, but I'm just one person, we're just one army. What if it's not enough?" "You've done more than anyone could ask for, Emma," Harris said softly. "You've given us a fighting chance. You've shown us that we can win, that we can take down the impossible, and that's more than enough." She looked out across the base, her thoughts heavy. She had made a difference, but it didn't feel like enough. The Vecrians were still out there, and they weren't going to forget what had happened. The fear that gnawed at her insides was a constant companion. "You don't know what it's like," Emma said quietly, more to herself than to Harris. "To carry all the weight, to know what's at stake." Harris stepped closer, his expression softening. "I do know. I've fought in wars, I've watched my people die, but I've also seen what happens when we stand together, when we don't give up. And I've seen that in you. You're not carrying this alone anymore. We're all in this together." Emma turned to face him, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. "But if we lose?" "We won't lose," Harris said, his voice full of quiet conviction. Not while you're leading us. Emma took a deep breath, her chest tight with emotion. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they had a chance, that they were strong enough to stand against the Vecrians. In that moment, she realized that Harris was right. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. The strength of humanity wasn't in one person. It was in all of them working together. It was in the fighters, the engineers, the survivors who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. They had been knocked down, yes, but they weren't out. The sun sank lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the mountains. It was a beautiful, peaceful sight, one that Emma hadn't seen in so long. The world was still standing, and for the first time in a long while she felt a flicker of hope. They were going to win. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Emma threw herself into the work, training new recruits, strategizing with Harris, and helping design the next steps for the human resistance. The sense of unity that had begun to grow in the base became a powerful force. Every person, from the soldiers to the engineers, was driven by one goal: to end the Vecrian threat once and for all. Emma spent long hours working on plans to attack the Vecrians where they were weakest, exploiting their technological gaps and hitting their supply lines. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about turning the tide of the war. One morning, as Emma stood in the planning room with Harris, the doors to the chamber slid open. A soldier entered, her face a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. "Lieutenant, we've got something," the soldier said, her voice trembling slightly. "We've intercepted a transmission from the Vecrians. They're mobilizing. They're coming for Earth again." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this day was coming, but hearing it confirmed was still like a punch to the gut. The Vecrians weren't done. They had rebuilt, and now they were coming to finish what they had started. She looked at Harris, who met her gaze with a calm resolve. "It's time," he said simply. "We fight." Emma nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. But this time she wasn't afraid. They had a plan, they had strength, and they had the will to fight for their future. "Let's end this," Emma said, her voice full of determination. "For humanity." As the base began to prepare for the final confrontation, Emma stood tall, her shoulders squared. The Vecrians had made a mistake when they underestimated humanity. They had mocked her, called her tactics primitive. But now it was clear, humanity wasn't primitive. It was fierce, it was resilient, and it would fight until the very end. The battle was not over, but Emma knew one thing for sure: they were going to win.